Hi folks, I wanted to post one last video before you do your policy debates to talk about voting issues and impact analysis. This is really about how do you end your last rebuttal? How do you take all the issues, all the arguments that have been going back and forth in the debate and narrow the focus down to what your strongest argument is. We might get a cameo from my cat. Oh, no, decided not to be in the camera. More about your debates, less about my cat. So, in your last rebuttal, you want to end the debate with what we call a voting issue. The idea is that throughout the debate, many different arguments have gone back and forth. By the end, you want to narrow the focus of the debate down to your strongest argument. Whatever that strongest argument is, or in other words, the argument that you would want the audience to consider first when they evaluated the debate or when they were voting for who won the debate, that's what we call a voting issue. And I'll have examples from our dog debate in a moment. So both the affirmative and the negative debaters ideally should end with voting issues. It's then up to the audience or the judge to decide which voting issue is the most significant. Debaters can help make this decision clearer by providing what's called impact analysis. This helps show why their voting issue is more significant than others in the debate. So let me step back from this document for a moment and then I'll come back to it. The reason why in your value debates we ended all the contentions with impacts, and the reason why in your policy debates we're ending all your advantages and disadvantages with impacts is because the impact ultimately tells me why your argument is significant, right? And so when we get to voting issues, it's that significance of the arguments that we want to compare. We want to see, okay, so you're winning this advantage, you're winning this disadvantage. Ultimately, what's the significance of that advantage and that disadvantage, and how do we decide which one is more significant? That gets us to impact analysis, where we're comparing the impacts of arguments that each side is winning, or in this case, comparing the arguments of the voting issues that each side puts forward. So if both are significant, how do we decide which one is more significant? So if we go back to this, there are three basic criteria that debaters use when evaluating the significance of arguments or the significance of voting issues. And so those are magnitude, so how big is the impact? The second is probability, how likely is the impact? And the third is timeline, how soon will the impact occur? So let's get to some examples. So if we go back to the dog debate, we can see how these terms might get used in those final rebuttals when you're trying to persuade the audience or the judge that you've won. So in one of the sample debates that we saw in a Zoom meeting, the affirmative said that her voting issue was that getting a dog would ultimately help with mental health. And the negative said that her voting issue was that the dog would cost too much money. So which one is more significant? Let's assume that both of those things are true, but we have to decide which one's more important. So let's start with magnitude. Magnitude asks us how big are the impacts. Debaters in competition often try for very big impacts because they want this high magnitude. There's a joke in competitive debate that everything leads to nuclear war. This is because obviously nuclear war is a high magnitude impact. So which one in our debate, in our dog debate, is bigger, mental health or money? I think you can make arguments on both sides, and it depends on how costly the dog is, but I might argue that mental health is more significant. If the dog costs millions of dollars, then maybe the money might be bigger, but I don't think that's the case here. Also, when you look at magnitude and how big it is, you can think about it both in terms of quantitative and qualitative size. So it's not just like how big is it can we count, like the dollars, but also just how big is it qualitatively in terms of feelings, right? So if a bunch of people suffer or a bunch of people are dehumanized, that's qualitatively a giant impact. And that's part of the reason I think here that mental health might be more important than money. It depends on how much money, but qualitatively, I think mental health is just bigger. But debaters could make arguments on both sides on magnitude. So then the next factor is probability. How likely are the impacts? An impact with high magnitude and low probability is actually not that significant at all. So if a debater said that nuclear war was going to happen because we buy a dog, nuclear war is still a big magnitude impact, but it has almost zero probability in this debate and therefore is not strong at all, right? How likely is it that if we get a dog, somehow that's going to lead to nuclear war? It's not at all likely. It might have zero likelihood, and zero times anything, even if we call a nuclear war a million, right? A million on magnitude, zero on probability, put them all together, it's still a zero impact because it's just not likely to happen at all. So which one is more probable in our dog debate, mental health or money? I think in this case it's actually probably money. There's a 100% chance that I will spend money on a dog. Anyone who's ever had a pet knows you will spend money. How much, how big, I don't know. But is it likely that we will spend money? It's not just likely, it's guaranteed, it's certain. The dog might improve my mental health, but I don't have that absolute certainty that it will that I do when it comes to spending money on the dog. So I think in terms of probability, the negative could make a pretty strong argument that she had the more probable impact. So the last factor that we'll consider is timeline. How soon will the impact occur? In competitive debate, we tend to focus on impacts that will occur sooner rather than later. The idea is that things that happen well off into the future are not as significant as impacts that occur immediately. A nuclear war that's going to happen in 50 years is not as significant as one that will occur tomorrow. Because if it's going to happen in 50 years, we have 50 years to intervene with other policies to try to avert it, right? So we can say, oh, this is going to happen in the future, but we have plenty of other things we can do to try to stop it in the intervening 50 years. If the nuclear war is going to happen tomorrow, there's almost nothing we can do to stop it. So we tend to privilege impacts that happen sooner rather than later. So which will happen sooner, mental health or money? It's tough to be certain, but if we maybe rephrase that, if I was the affirmative debater and I was trying to win on timeline, I might rephrase this and say, which will happen sooner? Will the dog bring me joy sooner, or will the dog make me go broke sooner? I think with that slight reframing, I think we could say that the joy will happen sooner, and that so mental health is probably going to happen earlier on the timeline than spending so much money on a dog that it makes me go broke. So given all that, if this was the impact analysis that I heard in that debate, I would probably end up voting for the affirmative and saying the affirmative won because the mental health impact was both bigger and going to happen sooner, whereas the money impact was more probable, but maybe not as big and not going to happen as soon. Okay, so that's how that maybe the affirmative could persuade me that she had won this debate over the negative. So I hope this helps you think about what to say in your last rebuttal speech and how to persuade an audience that you won the whole debate. So in that last speech, think about what's my strongest argument? Why is it the strongest? Can I argue that it's the biggest impact? Can I argue that it's the most probable impact? Or can I argue that it's the impact that's going to happen the soonest? And ideally, can I do all three? Can I say that I'm winning because I have an impact that's big, it's very likely, and it's going to happen right away? If you can do that, you've probably won the debate. All right, looking forward to seeing these policy debates starting next week.